Okay, welcome back to the Get Out of Your Comfort Zone interview series. I'm Andy Molinsky, and in this series, we engage thought leaders about the challenges they have had stepping outside their comfort zones in their lives and any advice that they might have for the rest of us. Today, I have a very special guest with us. Her name is Whitney Johnson. She's had a pretty amazing career as an investor, executive, and now an influential management thinker, writer, and podcaster. So Whitney's been recognized as one of the world's most influential management thinkers in 2015. She was a finalist for the Top Thinkers on Talent at the biennial and very well-known Thinkers 50 ceremony in London. She is perhaps best known for her work on driving corporate innovation through personal disruption. Her excellent book in 2015 was called Disrupt Yourself, is a critically acclaimed book, and she is now the host of a Disrupt Yourself podcast. I could go on and on, but I will stop here, and I will welcome Whitney Johnson, and thank you so much, Whitney, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So as you know, what we're interested in here is in situations in your personal or professional life where you have had to step outside your comfort zone. And I'd just be curious for you to tell us about a situation that comes to mind, what it was, tell us about it, what were the challenges, and perhaps, how you overcame the challenges if you did, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, this is such a fantastic question. So thank you for asking it, and I'm really excited about answering it. I would say that something I did that really got me out of my comfort zone started. It's fairly recent, so it started about 2 years ago. I had gone to my doctor for an annual checkup, and he told me that I was pre-diabetic. And so my initial response was, I wasn't actually scared or anything. I was just really angry because I thought to myself, I'm really good. I don't smoke. I don't drink. Like, I have very few vices. And I felt like, okay, sugar, this is my vice, and I deserve to, be able to eat sugar. I deserve the cookies that I eat every night. And so, but I was, I didn't want to get diabetes. And so I started to say at the beginning of 2015 that I was going to stop eating sugar. And then I was off for a month. And then at the end of the month, I'm like back on sugar because I had a deadline on my book. And of course, I deserved to eat sugar because, I deserved sugar. And then I would go off again, and then I would go on again, and I would just kept ping-ponging back and forth, back and forth. And toward the end of 2015, my daughter came to me and said, "Mom, you're a hypocrite." And for anybody who's listening who has children, I mean, children are the ultimate truth tellers. And I thought, okay, well, all right. I said I would stop eating sugar, so I gave it serious consideration as I made another batch of cookies. And then I realized, okay, wait a second. I am going to get diabetes if I don't stop. I'm being a really, really bad example. And, oh, by the way, if I don't give up sugar, then this silly little thing that I talk about in disruption all the time, sugar is going to upend me. And so I promised her that I wouldn't eat cookies, candy, cake, Diet Coke for all of 2016. And that was completely out of my comfort zone because I truly love sugar. I mean, I think I'm actually addicted to it. Absolutely. And so to have to go to a whole year of not eating that, trying to find different ways to soothe myself when I felt stressed, it was a huge, huge step out of my comfort zone, but it was absolutely 100% worth it.
That's really interesting. And, it's interesting. The theme of what you're talking about is very similar to what I've heard in situations that aren't about sugar, that might be, about networking or public speaking or, making small talk with someone you don't know, whatever it is that's outside your comfort zone, that you have fits and starts, you avoid for various reasons. And then ultimately there's something that pushes you, that that sort of motivates you to do something that every bone in your body is saying don't do. And for you, was that so? So was it your daughter? I mean, was it the idea, the role, the idea of being a role model, or what say more
Yeah,
about that?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think it was a combination of things. It was my daughter who, I mean, I think the thing about children is that on the one hand, they're our harshest critics, but on the other hand, they're our biggest fans. And so her just showing me to myself and me talking on a daily basis to people about personal disruption and how you have to upend your status quo and do things differently. I was really letting this food get the best of me. And so when she held up the mirror and showed me to myself and just said, "What are you doing? Like, you don't keep your word, and you said you would keep your word." I think that was a really, really big turning point. And then the realization that I couldn't just do a little bit less. Like, I was going to have to abstain completely because it was just because, as with an addict, you can't have just one drink. You can't have just one cookie. You have to either abstain completely, or sort of, it's very binary, that or not at all. So the trigger was really my child being a truth teller and showing me to myself.
And I imagine your ambition to be a role model too, or to be a non-hypocrite.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as a parent and as a child, a child first and then as a parent, and I think, whether it's a boss or an employee, we want, we look it up to people and we want them to live up to who we think that they can be. And I think we also want to live up who people think that we are. And so when people give us that opportunity to live up who they believe that we can be, which is in fact what someone is saying to you when you're a hypocrite, they're saying, "I think you can be better." That's an opportunity, and it's a gift that someone hands to you.
It's funny, when you were talking about this, I had a memory that flashed through my head. It's something I haven't thought about for the longest time. When I was a kid, my dad was a smoker.
Uh-huh.
Then again, these were the days when lots of people were smokers. And I remember I must have learned as a real small child about the dangers of smoking, and I didn't want anything bad to happen to my dad. And I remember I would go find his cigarettes in his bag and I would cut them with a scissors. And he got so mad at me. But he must have, but to be honest, I think that was a catalyst for him quitting. He quit. He hasn't smoked in, 40 years or whatever it is. That's very interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about the connection between this story in your work, in your book, because I think that, I think if you're like the rest of us, I'm sure you are, and, this is what I find, anyone who creates, whether it's a book or a piece of art or a poem or a novel, you're always in some ways, I think, playing with your own sort of psyche, right? You're maybe working ideas out that are resonant to you in some ways. It's interesting that you wrote a book about personal disruption, and you're talking about a personal disruption. Can you say, and then you talked about being a hypocrite. Can you say more about how the book has connected maybe to your own life and to any,
Yeah.
acting outside your comfort zone in your own life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Gloria Steinem said this. At least it's attributed to her that we write what we need to learn and we teach what we need to know. Or some, I'm paraphrasing badly, but you get the point. And I think that if you look at me, and I think any author, whenever we set out to write something, we're so passionate about it. In part, we're passionate about it because it's something that we really need or we're trying to figure out. And so if I look at my own life, I think it's absolutely been marked by a series of disruptions, whether it's me as a low-end disruptor moving onto Wall Street as a secretary, whether it's me moving to New York with my husband from, a comfortable, safe place out west, or leaving my position on Wall Street to become an entrepreneur, or even disrupting myself and becoming a parent, because obviously that's a really scary thing to do. And sometimes people say to me, "Well, you must be pretty intrepid and fearless." And my response is, "No, I'm terrified all the time." But by having this framework of personal disruption, which is built on the framework of disruptive innovation, what I'm really trying to do is help myself, but everybody else be able to manage the change and have it be a little bit less scary. And so when I think about this idea of sugar, I'm not sure if I would have been able to do this if I hadn't had this sort of meta thing happening around personal disruption. And so for me, I constantly find myself saying, okay, here are these frameworks that I'm teaching and keynoting on and talking about and believe are very, very robust. But I only can really teach them if I'm trying to apply them to myself. Otherwise, it will ring hollow and people will know it. And so I may not do it perfectly, but I do know that if I'm constantly trying to disrupt my current way of being to a better way of being or iterating on myself, that when I state these ideas, people will be able to sense at a pretty deep sort of
Authentic.
Inchoate level that I'm trying to practice what I preach or, walk my talk.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about three different transitions I just heard in your story. You said from secretary kind of up the chain. You talked
Yep.
Wall Street to working on Wall Street to becoming an entrepreneur. And then from, not being a parent to being a parent, for instance, So, each of these, you could term them as disruptions, which is a nice way to put it. You could also term them as, taking a leap, acting outside your comfort zone, because
Absolutely.
clearly on one side, before you've taken the leap, is your comfort zone to an extent, and so, you see on the internet, people listening to this have probably seen memes on the internet, pictures on the internet that just say, just take a leap. Life begins, outside your comfort zone and so on. And, I imagine that on the cusp of moving up the chain from a secretary to wherever you transitioned, or from the cusp of making that call to leave Wall Street, or on the cusp of saying, we're having kids, what gives you the courage to take the leap? What enables you to do it?
I think that the courage comes from, it's not that I'm so bold or brave. It really comes from a place of, I'm more afraid of being stuck than I am of jumping. And so I think for me, I think about life or work or sort of any aspect of our sort of being on this planet is about forward progress, of moving from stuck to unstuck. And so I think the thing that really actually propels me forward is this desire to be unstuck.
What's bad about being stuck?
Oh, that's a really good question. So why, you're saying? Use the 5 whys. I like that a lot, and no one has ever asked me that. What is there about being stuck? I think for me, and I would actually sort of universalize this, is that there's something inside the human being or human spirit that we need to feel that we're making progress. Like it's an imperative in some way. I don't know if it's true for other people, but I know it's true for me, that it's like, our inalienable rights are, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I would say we need to be making progress.
So you had that drive, sort of.
Yeah.
Like it sounds like a drive. I mean,
it is
something I just almost like I can't stay where I am in some ways.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think a lot of people, would like to get unstuck, in their lives and their situations and their places. A lot of people have dreams of things that they'd love to do,
Yeah.
But I think it's really hard for people to get unstuck. I think that's really hard. And it's interesting. It sounds like the way you're describing it is some sort of, I don't know, just this deep inner need or something. It sounds like
I think that's right. I think that's right. But what's interesting as you're saying this is you're saying you don't think that necessarily everyone has that. And I guess I've believed, I have this a priori assumption that everyone does. So this is an interesting sort of.
Yeah, it's you know, and
Interchange.
I don't know. I think some people love to nestle in their comfort zone, and
Hmm.
they don't have that, you know, in psychologists would talk about a sort of openness to experience and so on. They don't have the wanderlust. They don't have that deep drive to move on to the next thing, or maybe that achievement orientation. They're just not wired that way. In other words, and that where they derive pleasure isn't from sort of the progression and the achievement, but they derive pleasure maybe from the connection and their affiliation, and you know, they're
Yeah.
happy to be where they are. Other
Hmm.
people might be so afraid of moving
Yeah.
ahead and so on that they rationalize to themselves the reasons why they shouldn't have to do it and so on. I don't know. I think it's a good question. I do feel that it's just from what you're talking about. It seems like inside you, and that's pretty interesting. Um,
Hmm.
do you do you, so it's I've also noticed that you've done a lot of work on understanding both people and companies, right?
Yeah. Right.
So what have you I don't know. What have you learned about comfort zones and companies act? I know a company ultimately is, you know, made up of people,
People.
obviously,
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
but what have you learned
Well,
about companies on this topic of comfort zones?
um, well, yeah. So I would say my main premise is that companies don't disrupt, people do. And so I think, not I think, but I believe, my hypothesis is, and actually this is my next book, is that, every company, if you want to move your company forward, if you as a company want to be an agent of disruption, you need to allow the people internally to be agents of disruption and to disrupt themselves. And so, um, what I would say is that the fundamental unit of disruption is the individual. So again, if people are allowed to, then the company will be able to. So I think about it on the company level, but I find myself always coming back to sort of those individual, discrete components that comprise the body of the corporation or organization.
Yeah, and I'll bet companies can, you know, create or not create conditions in the company that facilitate individuals'
Absolutely.
ability to do
It's
this, right?
fascinating. It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very interesting. Okay, so just as we wrap up here, you know, I imagine there are people listening who would, you know, love to be able to disrupt themselves, so to speak, and step outside
Mhm.
their comfort zones, whether it has to do with moving up in their careers, you know, taking the leap from one profession to another, or, you know, taking the leap in their personal lives towards
Right.
you know, a relationship or kids and so on.
Uh-huh.
Any words of
Yeah.
wisdom?
Yeah. So I would say, what are my words of wisdom around that? Yeah. So if you feel scared and if you feel lonely, then you're actually probably on the right path to disruption. And I think that's something that the textbooks on disruption don't tell you, and no one actually tells you, because we sort of talk about it in these sexy, exciting terms. But the fact is that whenever you disrupt, you're playing where no one else is playing. You're in uncharted waters. And so I would say to anybody listening, if you make this decision that you want to disrupt yourself even a little bit, if you feel little bit scared, then that's actually a signal to you that you're on the right path, rather than a signal that you should retreat. So if it's scary and it's lonely, you're probably on the right path.
That's really interesting. So read your emotion and be a wise interpreter of your emotion, right?
Yes,
Very
you said that
interesting.
very beautifully.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. This is super interesting, and good luck with your next book. It sounds great.
Thank you. I appreciate it.